So good morning student. Today I am going to discuss the teaching aptitude, and obviously it is of paramount importance to point out that the teaching aptitude is a very important dimension here, and it is of paramount importance to point out that you need to discuss the important aspects of teaching aptitude at length. আমাদেরকে টিচিং অ্যাপটিটিউড এই যে চ্যাপ্টারটা আছে, চ্যাপ্টারটা খুব ভালোভাবে জানতে হবে এবং আমি কিছু প্রেজেন্টেশন করব। সেই প্রেজেন্টেশনের মাধ্যমে তোমাদেরকে আমি দেখাবো যে টিচিং অ্যাপটিটিউডের যে ডিফারেন্ট চ্যাপ্টার এনটিএ-নেটে আছে সেটা কতটা ইম্পর্টেন্ট। The chapters which are really very important in case of NTA-NET, and I'm now going to discuss it at length so that I can be able to understand it very well, and I can be able to explain the chapters, the topics included in NTA-NET. So I'm going to present now, so let us present it. So it is very important to point out the syllabi of NTA-NET first. You can get a clear idea of how the syllabi is actually constructed and how these particular topics to be covered right here. You can be able to understand that the teaching aptitude here has the following aspects to be considered. So teaching, first teaching, concepts, objectives, levels of teaching, memory level, understanding level and reflective level. Three very important types of teaching. And also you can find out the characteristics and basic requirements. Okay, characteristics and basic requirements are there. So you need to understand how you can be able to make sure and also it is very pertinent to point out that this is of paramount importance to make it sure that these particular chapters to be considered. Now, the learner, in case of learner characteristics, you can be able to also find out the characteristics of adolescent learner and adult learners, an academic, social, emotional, and cognitive perspective of both adolescent learners and adult learners are taken cognizance of. Now, in order to describe these particular parameters at length, you need to know the characteristics of both adult learners and adolescent learner in each category. So we would like to discuss it, and we would like to help you realize how this will be very much pertinent in developing show. Now, we have to discuss also the factors affecting determining teaching related to teacher, learner, support material, instructional facilities, learning environment, and institutions. So, it absolutely talks of the speaks of the factors which are really responsible for determining the atmosphere of teaching, the ecosystem of teaching, and also it also lays bare the important factors contributing to teaching seamlessly. Now, also the particular chapter includes method of teaching in institutions of higher learning. Here there is a contention of comparative study of teacher-centered and learner-centered methods, offline versus online methods, and quite importantly, online methods have explicitly included Swayam, Swayamprabha, and MOOC. And obviously, if I scroll down the page, you can find out the other parts like teaching support system. You can find out the teaching support system here. It consists of traditional, modern, and ICT based. Are also the most important part, perhaps an integral as well as most important part. It's the evaluation systems, and we have to discuss the elements and types of evaluation. Evaluation in choice-based credit system in higher education, and computer-based testing, innovations in evaluation system, etc. So we need to discuss this at length. Now let us go back to the particular dimension of this matter one by one, and probably you can be able to understand that this is going to be a very important aspect. Now let us point out a very important aspect which is fundamental here in teaching theories. Okay, we have to discuss some important aspect of teaching theories, characteristics and functions, which are an integral part of our teaching system, teaching scenario, and you can find out this very well. Okay, so let us start first. So here you can be able to understand the basic aspect of the concept of teaching. The concept of teaching is itself a very important chapter in the particular aspect of teaching, and quite significantly, some thought-provoking ideas of teaching have been provided by some distinguished scholars, distinguished thinkers, and we need to discuss this very important, discuss it at length because questions are often raised on some definitions. Sometimes this speech of a thinker is provided in the question, and you are asked to define the or asked to select the correct answer of who correct answer about who has commented, so whose speech it is. Okay, such kind of question is very common. So now this is the concept of teaching. You have to point out that H.C. Morrison in 1934 contends that teaching is an intimate contact between a more mature personality and less mature one, which is designed to further the education of the latter. So it's a very important definition of teaching. Here Morrison lays bare the mutual coordination and mutual coordination and mutual understanding of two personalities who know more than the other. So the person who knows more than the other can help the other to learn. So it's a kind of interaction, it's a kind of coordination. Now, N.L. Gage, you can find out in 1962, he points out that teaching is a form of interpersonal influence aimed at changing the behavior potential of another person. It means that teaching is nothing but, or teaching is dealing with certain changes in behavior. Okay, teaching is dealing with certain changes in behavior, and this particular behavior is really, really very important in case of a particular individual. When a particular individual is actually conceptualized for the teaching, we need to understand how it can be done. So this definition helps us understand. So, now, according to B.D. Smith, teaching is a system of action intended to induce learning. And Albert Einstein, the distinguished scientist, also lays bare the fact that teaching is nothing but the supreme art to awaken joy in creative expression and knowledge. So Einstein brings out the creativity in expression and acquisition of knowledge. So you can be able to understand the different definitions. These are really, really very much informative. You can be able to study it regularly to understand. So now the teaching and summing all the above perceptions put forth by the renowned personalities, we can have the following takeaways. You can be able to understand that teaching is a significant and inextricable part of process of education. Its special function is to impart knowledge, develop understanding and skill. Now, teaching is regarded as a process of communication between two or more persons who are profoundly influenced by the thoughts, ideas, and notions exchanged between them. So, teaching is a kind of exchange of knowledge. Teaching is a kind of, imparting knowledge, developing understanding and skill. So, you can be able to find out all these. Now, you can be able to see that teaching is also a process where learners, teachers, and other variables are organized in a systematic manner to attain some premeditated goal. So whenever any particular teaching is concerned, obviously this teaching is directed to certain goals. Why we consider teaching? We consider teaching because we have to acquire certain goals. And when it comes to certain goals, obviously it is very vital to point out that certain goals are really something which actually help people attain self-discovery, self-realization, or self-actualization, which we can be able to discuss in motivation theory. But here you can have the tidbits of the idea of self-discovery, and it is the goal of teaching. And teaching actually helps us to attain the goal systematically. Now, it includes all the activities of providing education to others. So you know that it helps us providing education to others. So if I consider the particular characteristics of teaching in a nutshell, you can have the following points: giving some knowledge to students, handing down information to them, making the student acquire certain skills, changing the attitude of the learners, modifying the behavior of students, giving some experiences of life. So this is the very important characteristics of teaching. Okay, and probably you can be able to understand the characteristics of teaching also. Like it is an informal, it is an interactive process. It is both formal and informal. It is art, craft as well as science, because teaching is not only an art or craft, it's a science. It is not unilateral. It is not independent, because teaching cannot be practiced independently. We have to include all the stakeholders, and obviously some cooperation and coordination bear fruit in attaining the goal of self-actualization, or the goal which the procedure of teaching has set out. Now, it's a planned activity, absolutely. Without any plan, no activity can be possible. But obviously, it is, and teaching is not an exception. So, obviously, teaching actually is a planned activity. And it's a diagnostic and remedial process. It's dominated by communication skills. The more you gather the communication skill, the more you have so. And also it is a democratic process. It's a democratic process. It causes motivation. It's professional in character. And so, if I just point out the notions in brief, you can be able to understand how it is very much vital here. And when you consider that it is very much vital in terms of the methods of the teaching properly, you can be able to understand that this is the process of teaching which I have delved into appropriately. And when I have delved into all these aspects appropriately about the characteristics of teaching, probably you can understand that teaching is nothing but a process which actually helps learner learn, helps anyone learn, and obviously it's a mutual process. It's a mutual process, and as it's a mutual process, obviously you need to realize how it is of paramount, how it is really very important, how it is really very vital in terms of imparting knowledge. So when it comes to certain imparting knowledge, you need to know that when the process of teaching is initiated, it cannot be practiced or exercised one person independently. It's a mutual process. You need to include all the stakeholders. So when you need to include all the stakeholders, you need to understand that all the stakeholders have to contribute to the process of teaching in order to reach the desired goal. And when it comes to reaching the desired goal, you need to understand how and actually by what means we can be able to go further. Okay, so now let us consider again the presentation, and we make it sure that how it is very much important understanding so. So now we are going to discuss the diagnose the functions of teaching. So the functions of teaching is really very vital here, and you know that probably there are certain functions of teaching like diagnostic teaching, prescriptive teaching, and evaluative teaching. And probably you can understand the very important aspect of diagnostic teaching. And you know, diagnostic teaching actually diagnoses the limitations as well as the potentials of a learner. When it comes to diagnostic teaching, suppose you are visiting a doctor, and doctor actually diagnoses what disease you are suffering from. And if the diseases are correctly diagnosed, the prescribed medicines will work wonders. So it is very much important in case of teaching as well, because teaching is obviously an interactive process. And if I don't understand the traits of someone whom I am going to interact with or whom I am likely to interact with, I cannot be able to understand the nature of the discussion, the development of it. Okay, so in diagnostic teaching, you can be able to understand that what we have to take into account in the diagnostic teaching is the entering behavior of the student, initial potential of the student, and educational objective. So let us now content and instructional material and environment, his own potential and capabilities. What is more important? What is the most important part in the point? It is the own potential and capabilities. Unless and until you can be able to understand the potential and capabilities, you cannot be able to have a very important idea about how you are going to teach a student, what you are going to impart to the student, and how you can be able to understand the needs and necessities of the student before mapping out the study plan and spelling out the ways to deal with the student. You need to understand the potential of the student, the psychological traits of the student, the psychological dimension of the student. And if you can be able to understand it very well, perhaps you can be able to know how the student behave under certain conditions, and if the conditions are removed, are actually abandoned, how the student can be able to shift the performance, shift from one situation to the other. মানে আমাকে দেখতে হবে যে স্টুডেন্ট কতটা মানে পারফরমেন্স করতে পারছে। Now prescriptive teaching, that is you can be able to find out the characteristics of prescriptive teaching, which include selecting appropriate contents, and organizing them into proper sequence, selecting proper teaching techniques, strategies, feedback devices in view of the individual differences among students, seeking essential cooperation from the student or a purposeful interaction. So here in the prescriptive student, prescriptions have been extended regarding the strategies and feedback devices. Okay, regarding the strategies and the feedback devices. So when you find the individual differences among students, why and how actually you can be able to understand, and why and how it can be able to actually understand, and you can be actually able to make it sure that sorry, that how proper teaching techniques can be very much useful in dealing with students' psychological dimension, psychological aspect. And obviously cooperation is needed. If a student cannot be able to learn very fast, obviously, or if a student is a special child, a special student, you need to take certain important measures in order to deal with the situation. Now evaluative, that is absolutely premised on evaluation. So realizing the stipulated objective, various evaluation devices, okay, in the form of tests, observations, interviews, rating scales, inventories, and unstructured projective techniques are helpful in exercising evaluative functions. Students are more active. Failure in the realization of the objectives is essentially a failure in the prescriptive of diagnostic function. So you need to evaluate the performance of the students, and when it comes to evaluation of the performance of such students, you need also to make sure that your evaluation technique also be very much helpful and congenial to thriving the students psychologically as well as academically. Unless and until you can understand, so you can be able to make sure that you can be able to understand very well how it is very much important, how it is very much really important, and very much really understandable. So it is of paramount importance to point out. So now it is very much a gist of the particular aspect which I have dealt with. This is the gist. You can show that creating other general functions of teaching, that is creating learning situations, motivating the child to learn, diagnosing learning problem, explaining informing in initiation, direction, and administration. So it's a very important point I have already discussed, and here you can be able to understand it very well, that why I have already pointed it out. So because actually speaking, that when it comes to the particular aspect, and when it comes to this particular notion of teaching, and it comes to a particular point where you can understand why this is very much important, and how different types of teaching, different notions of teaching are really important in tackling differences in individuals, especially the individual learners, and you are going to understand how you can be able to tackle different psychological traits. So certain evaluative procedures, which I have already explained, actually make sense of the ways you can gauge the performance, the you can be able to understand the performance of the student, the potential of the students to learn, and different in the evaluation system you can be able to understand the different procedures are also very much important in making sense of how different students can behave under different situations. So it is of paramount importance to point out that the evaluation system, the evaluation procedure is of paramount importance in delving into the actual extent of progress, the not only the extent of progress but also certain limitations, certain shortcomings or pitfalls in learning can also be taken care of when we discuss the particular aspect of learning, okay, and teaching procedure. Now, again, I am going to the presentation here. So, describing the presentation, I would like to point out, describing the presentation, I would like to make sense of certain other aspects as well, and we can be able to understand certain important dimensions here. And here we are going to learn certain important aspects as well. Okay, so now going back to presentation, I would like to point out the micro teaching here. So what is micro teaching? What do you understand by micro teaching? Going back to presentation, what is, if you look at the micro teaching here, you can be able to understand that micro teaching actually it's a scaled down teaching encounter in a class size and class time. So it's not at all a full-time teaching, but also a part-time kind of teaching, a scaled down teaching. Okay, a scaled down teaching. It's not at all an exact way of teaching. So the number of students is from 5 to 10 and the duration of period is 5 to 20 minutes. You need to take into account the very important dimensions here. Its device which provides the novice as well as the experienced teachers alike with new opportunities to improve teaching. It's a real-time teaching because it is absolutely based on how you can be able to tackle different students, how you can be able to impart teaching to them, how you can be able to understand what they actually need, how you comprehend their needs, necessities. Okay, now it is based on Skinner's operant conditioning. Probably you can be able to understand that conditioning means certain atmosphere, certain controlled atmosphere where the behavior of an individual can be taken care of. Behavior of an individual can be taken care of, and obviously the point is to be extended regarding the actual application of the behavior in our day-to-day life, in our everyday life. So how a person behaves under certain conditions. So let's say negative or positive, it don't matter, but it doesn't matter. But actually, it is very much important to point out that it is based on Skinner operant conditioning. Now, the idea was first originated in the Stanford University in USA and the first coined in 1963. So here, the basic concept of micro teaching includes that micro teaching is itself a scaled down teaching. It's not a full-time teaching, but a scaled down teaching. And obviously, the most important part is that micro teaching is a real-time teaching. It actually gives some hands-on experience to the present teacher, to the incumbent teachers, as well as the would-be teachers, the potential teachers, to gather to master certain objectives, certain goals, in order to make sense of the micro teaching. And teaching actually you can be able to, whenever you learn it at length and you can be able to understand it. I have just touched upon the nuances of the concept. Now you can be able to find out the assumption that teaching, why we take into account micro teaching. Now teaching itself is a complex process but can be analyzed by means of breaking up into several small categories of skills. Yes, teaching itself is a complex process, but when it comes to certain judgment of the performance, certain evaluation of the performance, obviously the complex process can be split up into several small sections, several small categories. And on the basis of the individual categories, performance categories, point of view or traits, you can be able to discuss the categories of skill, and you can be able to take into account the assumptions properly. Now, under specific and simplified circumstances, teaching can be teaching can be practiced one by one up to the mastery level. Now, feedbacks, if given appropriately and systematically, could be an instrument to attain the mastery level easily and efficiently. So here lies the importance of feedback system. So if you cannot interact with the students, you are not well versed with the students' needs, you cannot be able to improve yourself, cannot be able to improve the current way you are teaching, current aspect of your teaching, and you cannot be able to incorporate certain welcome changes in your behavior so that it can accommodate the needs of the student. You can adapt yourself to the growing necessities of the student, changing atmosphere of the student needs, necessities, and more importantly, the interaction. So when all skill are mastered, these are cumulatively integrated into real skills in teaching. Skill teaching is to be transferred from simulated teaching situation to the actual classroom teaching situation. Now, teaching is observable, measurable, and demonstrable, and can be developed through training. So, it's a teacher teaching technique that plays a pivotal role in developing teaching skill. So this is the single skill for practice, and obviously you can be able to find out that one concept of content for teaching, and you can be able to notice it very well. Be very much vigilant of the number of students. Keep close tabs on the number of the student in the class. It's 5 to 10 students only. So 5 to 10 minutes of practice teaching. It means it's kind of practice teaching. Before joining as a teacher, before being recruited or employed as a teacher, you are asked to demonstrate your qualities of being a teacher. Why you are considered to be eligible for the profession of teaching. So it's a really brilliant platform to demonstrate yourself, to express yourself as a would-be teacher, as a potential teacher. Now you can be able to see the steps of micro-teaching very well. It includes plan, teach, feedback. So first of all, you have to plan how to teach. So first of all, you need to plan what you have to teach and how you have to interact with the student or stakeholders. Now then you start teaching. Afterwards, you seek feedback from the students. Okay, how they feel about this, how they feel about that. So if your feedback is not satisfactory, so obviously you need to replan and reteach, and again you seek feedback from students. And the phases you can: knowledge acquisition phase. When you teach, you are absolutely impart knowledge to the student, and also through interaction you can also master knowledge from student. Now skill acquisition phase. It's a skill acquisition phase. Here you have to acquire skill in teaching, and obviously through continuous practice you will actually acquire mastery in the act of teaching. And also transfer phase. What you understand, you are transferring your knowledge to the student. Also students also transfer their knowledge to you when they are really very much important. They are really feel it very necessary to transferring knowledge to you through interaction. Okay, so now let me again, I have to summarize what I have learned is that when it comes to such teaching, you need to understand that it is very much pertinent. And when it is very much pertinent to point out the basic aspect of teaching, I would like to make sure that micro teaching, it's a practice teaching. in terms of micro teaching, the qualities of the student are really judged, and judged in the sense that it is of paramount importance to point out that when it comes to micro teaching actually makes the student really very much helpful, really very much well acquainted with the situation where they can interact with the student. They can also seek their opinion of how you are teaching, of how you are understanding. And also it is of paramount importance to point out that how you are really very much efficient in understanding students' psyches, student traits, and student necessities. And accordingly, you are planning your lesson. Accordingly, you are going to interact with the student. Okay, so it's a really very important skill here. So now, besides being so, I'm going to discuss certain other aspects right here, because actually speaking that it is very much pertinent to point out, and it is really wonderful to make sure that you are going to learn how you can be able to understand this really well. And probably it is, as it is a very important part of our lesson plan, it is also some motivation theories I am going to discuss. Okay, and also the levels of teaching. Levels of teaching is very important, and obviously we have to discuss the levels of teaching in a very important way. And I'm going to just discuss the very much important way of learning. So, and here I'm going to just discuss here, and you can be able to understand the particular aspect right here. So you can be able to make sense of this, and you can be able to understand how it is really very much helpful in making sense of. So it's very much important here. So levels of teaching, what I'm going to discuss here, it's now on your screen. So what is levels of teaching? The levels of teaching, actually there are three levels of teaching. You can easily be able to understand that there are three levels of teaching: memory level teaching, understanding level teaching, and reflective level teaching. And perhaps you can be able to see the characteristics and the information of teaching. The memory level teaching, it's a rudimentary level of teaching where the teaching is absolutely based on memorization. Whatever you can memorize, you can write in the exam, and on the basis of your memorization power, you are being awarded marks. Okay. So here it is obviously very important that memory level teaching, it's the first thoughtless level of teaching. It is very important. It is the first thoughtless level of teaching. It is concerned with memory or mental ability that exists in all living beings. It is considered to be the lowest level of teaching, because it's the lowest level of teaching. Because why it is lowest level of teaching? Because here you cannot you don't require to think much. Just you memorize what you have been taught. Just you have and what you have been told by someone. If you can remember what your teacher has been told, or your teacher has taught you, you can be able to get marks. So just I'm reading out certain characteristics. The thinking ability does not play any role. Students only cram the facts, information, formulae, laws that are taught to them. I have already discussed. The teaching is nothing but learning the subject matter by rote. So it is absolutely encouraging rote learning. Whatever you learn, you are just remembering. You don't require to put in your thinking, put in your thoughts, and you obviously there is no room for you there is no room to you for creativity. And obviously you need to understand that it is introduced by Harvard. Obviously, in examination, the proponents of different levels of teaching are usually asked. So obviously, it is a very important point. It is introduced by Harvard. Teachers' roles are prominent while students' role are secondary. You can also know it very well. Study materials are organized and pre-planned. It acts as the first stage of understanding and reflective levels of teaching. It does not contribute to the development of students' capabilities. Learning by rote is barely helpful in reality. It lacks motivation and intelligence, does not carry any special significance. Okay, so the understanding level of teaching, if you just look at the, so by the name you can be able to understand that what is understanding level of teaching. The understanding level of teaching actually implies that it is not only helpful in memorizing the facts, but also you need to understand what you have memorized. You need to understand what you have memorized. So you have to know that students make use of their thinking ability. Where thinking ability plays a very important role in shaping, formulate, mold students' mind. And knowledge acquired at this level forms the basis of the reflective level of teaching. Students do not learn by rote, rather they learn by understanding the facts and information coupled with their uses and purposes. So no interaction between students and teacher is possible as the teaching is subject centered. Now mastery on the subject concerned is the most important. Attempts are made to generalize the facts or information mastered in the course of understanding, and it is introduced by Morrison. Very simple features. You can, if you go through the points, you can be able to understand. It is being presented on the screen. So reflective level of teaching, it's the highest form of teaching. And probably it is also pointed out that it is also called introspective level of teaching. In introspection, you are going to investigate into your potentials, your thinking abilities, and many other aspects of your personality traits. So salient features, it is also called introspective level. Reflective on something means give a careful thought to something over a period of time. It also refers to thinking deeply about something. So obviously it's the highest level at which teaching is carried out. It is highly thoughtful and useful. A student can attain this level only after going through memory level and understanding levels of teaching. It enables students to solve real life problems. Students first understand the situation and use critical abilities to solve the problems thereafter. Emphasis is laid on identifying the problem, defining it, and finding solution to it. So students' original thinking and creative abilities at this level. The role of student is active, and teaching is democratic in nature, because in the reflective level of teaching, the teaching is democratic, because in the teaching process you are going to display your skill, you are going to put forth your skill, and you should be given a leeway in thinking properly so that you can be able to understand it very well. Now, if you just look at it, that the teacher does not force knowledge on student but develops their talents and capabilities. How a student can think, how far a student can think is very important. So it is put forth by Professor Hunt. So it is put forth by Professor Hunt, and obviously this particular theory is very vital in pointing out that this particular theory of levels of teaching actually helps us understand how this is really, how different ways of teaching is really helpful in realizing the teaching skills, where the teaching skill is a prerequisite, where a teaching dimension is prerequisite, and how this particular teaching is really very important. Okay, now we can be able to also have already discussed some basic aspect of teaching. Okay, now look at some other points, because teaching is a very much important here. So without wasting much time, I am going to discuss the very basic aspect, which is really very important in our study, and it is educational philosophies. We can be able to deal with the educational philosophies in the perspective of teaching aptitude, because it is very much important in the in the paper 1 of Nta-Net. So we are now discussing the teaching the educational philosophies here. So these educational philosophies actually lays bare certain important techniques, certain important thoughts of certain philosophers who actually propounded this in terms of imparting education. So Here you need to understand the names of the philosophers as well as their tenets, basic tenets. So we are going to initiate the discussion with idealism. Probably idealism is a very much traditional and conventional notion where self realization, self self-realization is very important, and everything must be premised on theocratic views related to God, theocratic views related to God, and obviously attempts have been made to delve into how a theocratic approach develops the notion. Okay, so it is a kind of salvation. Okay, so proponents, you can be able to notice it: Kant, Plato. So Plato is called the father of idealism. Sometimes questions is raised. Okay, so Plato is the father of idealism. Now Forbel, William Harris, Rabindranath Tagore, Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Dayanand, Vedic seers. So the basic tenet, it believes in the concept of God. So universe is perceived to be the creation of God. You can also be able to know it. And also, what is very important in the context of teaching aptitude in terms of the educational philosophy is the is what is the application of this philosophy in to the processes of teaching, to the ways of teaching, to the methodologies of teaching in particular. So, basic tenets, it believes in the concept of God. Universe is perceived to be the creation of God. The ultimate reality is spiritual attainment. Now eternal spiritual values are immutable. So some values are immutable or unchangeable. Truth, beauty, and goodness are some of the eternal values. Spiritual laws are universal. Self-realization and spiritual development through education. So what is the actual idea which drives education in case of idealism? It's self-realization and spiritual development. Okay, so emphasis on ethics and humanities, study of cultural heritage, because cultural heritage plays a very important role here. Now, it is regulated freedom and self-discipline. And what is really written in bold is lecture method and question answer method of teaching, with teacher being an ideal person. Because in idealism, teacher is regarded all in all in the ecosystem of education. And when teacher is respected by the student, what teacher instructs students to do, students will simply obey it unquestionably. Okay, and it is perhaps the most important part of our system. Now, naturalism. So, proponents Francis Bacon. You can watch it very well in the presentation. I am just going to make sure that differences, the points of distinctions, which help you distinguish from one philosophy to the other. So Francis Bacon, Rabindranath Tagore, Rousseau, Spencer, Comina. So you can also get the name, but I am skipping this. Okay. So you can be able to understand that no belief in the existence of God. So this is the different point. No belief in the existence of God. Universe is believed to be the creation of human beings, because universe is actually believed to be the creation of human beings, as the naturalists or the philosophers belonging to naturalism actually repudiated the existence of God. So the question of creation of the world by God is absolutely meaningless and futile to them. Ultimate reality is physical, values undergo changes. So it is the most important distinguishing point of naturalism, because actually the idealism adheres to certain values which are immutable. I pointed out, but here in the naturalism, the contention of values undergoing changes in different points of time is considered. Okay, so self-expression aiming at autonomous development of individual possible, and here you can see that direct observation and heuristic method of teaching, with teacher being an observer, is the basic tenet of learning and teaching here, because you can see the naturalist principle of Rabindranath Tagore in establishing Vishwabharati in Santiniketan. Because in this Santiniketan, Rabindranath thought of establishing a learning center where the learners could be able to learn in the lap of nature through observation. Okay, through observation, and actually the learning through observation emancipates their mind. Actually, this is the contention of Rabindranath Tagore. So direct observation and heuristic method of teaching with teacher being an observer. Now uncontrolled freedom where discipline to be attained through natural consequences. Now what is pragmatism? Pragmatism actually the proponents of pragmatism, and obviously let me just go back to naturalism, that naturalism actually points out that uncontrolled freedom where discipline to be attained through natural consequences. You have to nurture discipline, you have to harbor discipline, but it is to practice. So observation and heuristic method of teaching with teacher being an observer. So pragmatism, it's a pragmatism. So William James Pierce, John Dewey. Actually, Dewey is famous for the particular term learning by doing, which we often use nowadays, because we are not at all bound by certain theoretical moorings, but you have to practice certain practical dimensions, practical approaches, where you open up the spaces to practice exercises, and thus through exercises, through hands-on experience, you can learn. So here some beliefs in the existence of God. Universal is natural creation, and there is no universal laws. Okay. Self-sufficiency with adjustment with present aim. Now stress on utilitarian subjects and vocational subjects. Actually, pragmatic approach is based on reality, because in reality, what is most needed is the practice as well as some utilitarian dimension. Without utilitarian dimension, you can do it. Okay, so the learning by doing, it is pointed out by John Dewey. So project method and teacher being a friend and philosopher. Okay, so obviously you can see nothing is there. So you can see this particular way, because I have already pointed out social work to group work, and here actually it actually makes sure that when it comes to very important point, and I have already pointed out the philosophies, the natural philosophies here, and it is very much pertinent to make sense of the particular point that the educational philosophies actually help you develop your mind, develop your perspective, and also it helps you understand how you can be able to make sure the basic tenets of education system. And different philosophers have put forth various ideas, like idealism is absolutely premised on the belief in God and self-realization through abiding by values, whereas teacher being the supreme one to guide the students must learn from teachers unquestionably. But the naturalism actually relies on practice and heuristic method, and the pragmatism also takes into account the project method, the group work method for learning. So you can find out some distinguishing points, and afterwards I'm going to discuss just another very important point, that concept of evaluations, because evaluation is a very important concept, and probably you know it very well that when it comes to evaluation, we have to learn why evaluation is made, and we have to understand how evaluation can be practiced, why evaluation can be practiced, and how evaluation can be able to make difference. So we are going to discuss why evaluation is very much important right here. So concept of evaluation is very much integral. Concept of evaluation is very much integral in the particular aspect of education system. So it's a systematic procedure of collecting, analyzing, and interpreting the information to determine the extent to which pupils are achieving instructional objectives. So people are attending, the people are actually the it is very systematic procedure of collecting, analyzing and interpreting the information to determine the extent to which pupils are achieving instructional objective. So because why evaluation is made in order to judge a particular person, how he has progressed or he or she has progressed, how the progress is made, what points need to be considered in order to ensure development in learning. So it's kind of observation. So formative evaluation, it's an integral part of learning process. It's frequently done during the, so what is formative evaluation? You can be able to understand that formative evaluation an integral part of the learning process. It's frequently done during the course of instruction. Now its results are also made immediately. Results are also made immediately, very much important here. So results are also really very much immediately available to the learners. It does not take time. It doesn't take time. So it results are very much immediately available to learners. It may sometimes take teachers' observations only. It reinforces the learning of the student. Its results cannot be used for grading or placement purposes. It motivates learner as it provides the learners with the knowledge of progress made by me. It envisages the role of the evaluation as a process. It is generally teacher-made test. It helps in modification of instructional strategies, including the method of teaching writing. So actually speaking, that formative evaluation, it's a periodic evaluation when a student is actually being judged continuously on the basis of how he performs in the class, how his performance can be taken care of. In such a scenario, we can be able to understand the very important dimensions right here. So in the formative evaluation, the teacher is evaluating the student based on the immediate performance. So during instruction, the evaluation is conducted and the student is actually being evaluated on the basis of his performance on the topic the teacher is dealing with. So it's a very much important here. So it's a teacher-made test for understanding the progress of the student, the extent of progress to the students. An example I have given here, the example of formative evaluation, monthly test, class tests, periodical assessment, teachers' observations, etc. Now, summative evaluation. So what is summative evaluation? Summative evaluation is actually the evaluation which we usually are accustomed to, because summative evaluation here at the end of in the end of the course, the student has to appear a test and a student is awarded grade on the basis of what the student writes in the examination. So there is no room for self evaluation, there is no room for self self judgment, or no room for understanding how the student is gradually progressing. So obviously it is done at the end of the course of instruction, which I have already pointed out, and the main objective is to assign the grades to the student. It evaluates the extent to which students have mastered the content. It helps the student judge the appropriateness of instructional objective. It may brand a student a failed candidate who wreaking havoc on the confidence of the student, because in the summative evaluation some student is considered to be unsuccessful in the sense that they cannot score well or they cannot be promoted because of the poor marks they obtain in the exam. So it's a judgmental in character. It's terminal in nature as it is conducted at the end of the course. So here you can get the examples like traditional school and university exams, standardized test, teacher-made test, practical and oral test. So the exam system, I have already pointed out, the exam system which is really very important here. Now diagnostic evaluation. So in the diagnostic teaching, I have already pointed out that it is based on finding out the potential of the learner, finding out the potential of the learner as well as the means the character. So here difficulties in learning occur at all levels and among pupils of both high and low mental abilities. Actually, the diagnostic test takes off when the formative evaluation leaves off. Formative evaluation actually helps you judge a student on the basis of how he or she progresses on a particular subject, on a particular topic which the teacher concerned deals with. But in the case of diagnostic evaluation, not only this particular aspect is taken care of, but also the student's potential is also taken care of. Okay, so now the diagnostic test takes off when the format evaluation leads up. It's a means by which an individual profile is examined and compared under certain norms or criteria. It's more intensive and acts as a tool for analysis of learning difficulties. It's limited to students with low ability. It's corrective in nature because actually it underscores the potential, the limitations, the probable opportunities of learning among the students. So it's more comprehensive. It can be done by constant observation of pupils, analysis of performance, achievement test, analysis of cumulative records, anecdotal records, etc. So what is very important in this case is the notional approach of these three evaluation, and these three evaluations actually makes it sure that it is very much important and very much pertinent to how it can be made important and how it can be made sure. And it is probably the most important part of how it is really very important in understanding the fact that it is not only a test which is very much important and which is very much understandable. So here I have to point out that the three types of teaching which I have already pointed out, it is very much important right here. And so I would like to point out that what I have already presented, this particular presentation which I have already pointed out, cumulatively deal with the basics of teaching, the aspect of evaluation, and some notional dimensions right here. So I feel that the particular presentation I have made today is actually covering the portion, the fundamental portion of teaching, the fundamental portion of teaching aptitude, which is usually raised in the examination, and all the probable information which I have already presented through the presentation can be of immense help in terms of in course of preparation, which I firmly believe. So please go through the preparation. Tomorrow I will discuss the next topic, and I will obviously make sure that this is of paramount importance to point out that this particular presentation will help you a lot in developing and understanding the concept of teaching in the course of preparation. So thank you very much. Please go through the presentation and you can get an idea properly. So thank you very much. Goodbye. So it's absolutely nice to uh, broadcast it on YouTube. So please view this on YouTube, and also let me know your opinion of about how I present and how you learn. Thank you very much.